3 weeks before Baha'u'llah's ascension, he was contracting a fever and he had to take to his bed. As he lay in his sick bed, Baha'u'llah ordered Abdu'l-Baha to gather all his papers which were in the room and to place them into 2 special suitcases. Aware of the implications of this command, Abdu'l-Baha was shaken to the very depths of his being, for he sensed the finality of this act. It was as if Baha'u'llah had said, "It is finished." As he hesitated to comply, Baha'u'llah repeated his direction. With trembling hands and tearful eyes, Abdu'l-Baha began to gather the papers. In a tablet, Abdu'l-Baha describes the agony of his heart as he forced himself to undertake this task. As he was doing so, his cousin entered the room. This cousin was the principal instigator of Mirza Muhammad Ali, the archbreaker of the covenant, Abdu'l-Baha's half-brother. This cousin would later be denounced as the incarnation of Satan because of his fiendish ingenuity and guile with which he undermined the covenant. But upon seeing his cousin enter the room, Abdu'l-Baha asked for his assistance in gathering Baha'u'llah's papers, so that this task, so extremely painful to him, might soon be finished. When all the papers, the seals, and the other items had been locked into the cases, Baha'u'llah said to Abdu'l-Baha, "These now belong to you." These words, implying the approach of the final hours of Baha'u'llah's earthly life, pierced Abdu'l-Baha's heart like an arrow. When the ascension took place, Abdu'l-Baha's grief knew no bounds. The shock he sustained as a result of this calamitous event was so intense that he found it difficult to describe. But he says that in the morning, along with his brother, his half-brother, Mirza Muhammad Ali, he began the task of preparing Baha'u'llah's remains for burial. Muhammad Ali suggested to Abdu'l-Baha that since the floor would become wet as they were washing Baha'u'llah's body, it would be better to take the 2 cases out of the room and into his brother's room. Abdu'l-Baha was at that point in such a state of shock and grief that he was almost unconscious of his surroundings. He never thought that behind that suggestion could be a treacherous plot designed to rob him of that precious trust. Abdu'l-Baha agreed, and the 2 cases were taken out. Baha'u'llah's sacred remains were laid to rest that same day. After this, Abdu'l-Baha was disconsolate and heartbroken. He says that for 3 consecutive days and nights he could not rest a single moment. He wept for hours and was in such a state of unbearable grief. The light of the world had disappeared from his sight, and all around him had been plunged into darkness. On the 4th night after the ascension, he arose from his bed at midnight and walked a few steps, hoping it might help to bring a measure of tranquility to his agonized heart. As he began to pace the room, he saw through the window a scene his eyes could scarcely believe. His unfaithful brothers had opened the suitcases and were looking through Baha'u'llah's papers, those papers which had been entrusted to the Master. Abdu'l-Baha was deeply disturbed by the treachery of his brothers so soon after the ascension of their father. This act of unfaithfulness, committed so dishonorably against the most sacred trust of God, inflicted further pain and suffering upon his sorrow-laden heart. He returned to his bed immediately after this incident, for he did not wish his brothers to know he had seen them interfering with the contents of Baha'u'llah's cases. At this point, Abdu'l-Baha thought to himself that since his brothers had not seen the will and testament of Baha'u'llah, which was in Abdu'l-Baha's possession, that they were trying to find some document among his writings with which to justify their intended action of undermining the foundation of the cause of God. and creating a division within the ranks of his avowed supporters. However, Abdu'l-Baha hoped when they saw the will and testament, their efforts would be frustrated, and they would then return the 2 suitcases to him. On the 9th day after the ascension of Baha'u'llah, the Book of the Covenant was read to all, and now there was no shadow of a doubt as to who the center of the covenant was. But to no avail. Soon after that historic day, one of the Afnan asked Abdu'l-Baha to use one of Baha'u'llah's blessed seals to seal a tablet which had been revealed by Baha'u'llah in his honor. When Abdu'l-Baha asked his brothers to give him the seals of Baha'u'llah, which had been placed in the cases, they pleaded ignorance, saying they did not know anything about the 2 cases. Bewildered and perplexed by such a remark, Abdu'l-Baha was plunged further into sorrow and grief. He describes how his whole being began to tremble when he heard such a response from his brothers, and knew that great tests and trials lay ahead. The Master never again saw those 2 cases. When I reflect on this story, I wonder who had more right than the center of the covenant to these cases, entrusted to him by the manifestation of God. And yet he made no complaint and he found no fault. Abdu'l-Baha's sin-covering eye amazes me. Rather than being right, he preferred to be united. So many of us would self-righteously assert that this was certainly our possession, and then we would find fault with the breakers of that trust, but not Abdu'l-Baha. Instead, the ministry of Abdu'l-Baha began so vigorously that Baha'i communities everywhere were overwhelmed. Letters from the Master poured into every village, town, and country like drops of rain in spring. The friends were cheered and enamored by his life-giving words. Therefore, they arose in unprecedented numbers to proclaim the faith and teach the cause. Gradually, more enthusiasm, unity, and activity developed on every level of Baha'i life. In a short time, lethargy, indifference, and coolness were replaced by intense teaching activities. The moral of this story for me is Abdu'l-Baha's example, so that when I look at the headlines every day illustrating the collapse of the old world order, to remind me not to find fault and blame and criticism, but rather to share the unifying teachings that will unite and uplift people for the work of integration of society. And since the ancient beauty was exposed by day and night on the field of martyrdom, let us in our turn labor hard. Let us fling away our lives and renounce our brief and numbered days. On this day of Baha'u'llah's ascension, let us turn our eyes away from the empty fantasies of this world's divergent forms and serve instead this preeminent purpose, this grand design of building the world order of Baha'u'llah. Ya Baha'u'llah Pa, Ya Baha'u'llah Pa, Ya Baha'u'llah.